Hi students, hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to our series of lectures. We have now finished with our theory of chapters 1 to 7 and we are moving on to Microsoft Access, which is a database. What I'm going to do in the first video is to explain to you a bit of the theory behind databases and what we are going to be doing over the next few weeks. The first activity that is on Blackboard that we're going to be handing out is the following one, which consists of 9 steps, and it is effectively just creating a database table. Now, why do we use a database? To keep it simple, if you have a spreadsheet and you are storing bank client information in there, that spreadsheet is going to become very large very quickly, and you would eventually land up in a problem where you can't store 5 million people in a single spreadsheet. You possibly could, but it becomes very difficult to search for information, to sort your information, and to retrieve your information. So what we're going to deal with today is the types of databases and the one that we are using, which is going to be a relational database. To do that, I am going to use a diagram. I'm going to create a diagram for you guys using a very simple program called Paint. Okay, if we have a look at databases, they have evolved over time and there are various different kinds. One, it is in your slides. Please have a look at the slides. One of the first types of database is flat file. A flat file database you could consider something like an Excel spreadsheet. It is just one single document and it contains all the information. Then we have hierarchical. Which, for an example of that, if you look at your file structure on your computers, basically we will have a structure that is a hierarchy of tables. So this is a structure then we have, I'm not going to explain each one, we will have a network database, we will have a tree structure, and then finally let's get on to what we're going to be working with today, which is what is currently used in industry, and that is the relational When we speak about a database, we often refer to it as just a DB. Now, what are we talking about when we are talking about a relational database? I am simply going to use some shapes, and let's have a look at, very simply, our main database. And your database is going to have objects within it. So let's put some objects into the database. I will label them now. Right, so we have here a database with various objects in it. So please bear in mind we have the database itself, and to keep it simple I am going to call the database the main database. Let's give it a name here, and I'm just going to call it DB1, and that is the name of the whole database. Within the database we have what we call objects, and they are basically queries, forms, reports and tables. So let me label each one for you. So for example, this could be a query where you ask something of the database. This could be a report, something you would print for a meeting, or your boss asks you for a report, for example, of everybody that has not paid their rent, and you can query the database, and from that you can create a report. We then have forms. Forms is simply an easy way in which to enter data into a table. And in my database, I've put here what we are beginning with, and that is two tables. We will have here table 1, and we will have here table 2. The table is your basic element of storing information. And to make some notes on the side here, let's just have a look at these objects that we're talking about that sit inside the database. A table is to store the information. Then a query does exactly what it says. It will query and retrieve information. And sometimes we don't want all the information that is the table, we just want a part of the information that is in the table. Then we will have a form, which is a user-friendly way of entering data into a table. And then finally we will have the last item that we're going to work with, which is a report, which is drawn from the database, and it will contain specific information that is sitting in the tables, and a form can be made from a query. There are many different types of databases. We have used in industry. We have the language that we are going to use in a relational database, and that is SQL, standing for Structured Query Language. Then you will have a database that is used widely on the internet called MySQL. Then there is Microsoft SQL. Then you will get more larger commercial databases such as IBM DB2 and so on and so forth. There are quite a few products out there. I would like you to take a Google on what products are available out there, especially the enterprise products, which is what you would likely land up working with. The one that we are using for this course is a very simple desktop database called Microsoft Access. Oops, I spelt it wrong there. And Microsoft Access is what we are going to be working with. If it is a relational database, which Microsoft Access is, I will explain the concept of relations now. What they are talking about relations is if I have a table 1 here storing information and I have a table 2 here storing information, there will actually be a relationship between the tables, and we would draw it as so. There are various types of relationships that we can have. There is one-to-one, which I've just drawn, and what I'm referring to here is a one-to-many. So for example, one car can have many colors. We will deal with this later on, but that is why it is called a relational database, because there are relationships between various tables. Now, you don't only have to have 2 tables in a database, we could have hundreds or even thousands. Typically, the object is to store specific information inside a given table. So this could be table of employees, and this could be a table of employees' salaries, for example, where we would split up the information into nicely sized chunks. We are going to start with tables, and I am going to put some more information on the side here regarding tables and what tables are. So let's take a quick look at what we are talking about when we are talking about tables. Tables are simply a structure that consists of fields, and your fields are your columns, and we have rows, and your row is called a record. This will become apparent in our second video, where we actually create our fields and our rows. The third thing that I would like to mention here is a primary key, also known as a PK. And an example of a primary key could be, for example, an ID number. The government knows you by your ID number, and from your ID number they can tell who you are, where you live, what is your address, what is your tax status, and so on and so forth. Your primary key for the university, another example of it, could be your student number. From your student number I can tell what course you are registered for, what subjects you are registered for, whether your fees have been paid, what is outstanding, what fees are due, what textbooks do you need, and from that I would use your student number. And I think what to remember about primary keys is that they are unique. For example, a person's ID number, if that person is no longer around, they do not reissue that ID number. It is completely unique. It belongs to one record, and it will belong, if we are talking about a person, to one person only. So just to recap quickly, we have different types of databases. And they have evolved over time. Initially we had flat file, which looks like a spreadsheet. Then we had a hierarchical database, then we had a tree structure, then we had network databases. Some of them do still exist today, but they are not widely used. The one that we are using is the relational database because of these relationships between tables. One student will have many subjects. So we can actually write in here, this is a list of students, and this could be a list of subjects. Please be aware that one student can have many subjects, or one student could have one subject, and we would draw that differently. We will move on to that later on as we go along. So what we are talking about is the structure of a relational database that we are looking at here. We have the whole database, DB1, which we will create in MS Microsoft Access. And that is the whole database itself that has a name, and that name of this database is DB1. Then inside the database we will have query 1, query 2, query 3, report 1, report 2, report 3, form 1, form 2, form 3, and we will have a number of tables. And each one will have its own name. So the main point that I'm demonstrating to you is the database is the entire entity, and within inside the database we will have the objects that we are going to be working with during class. And they are in simple tables, which is the first thing that we are going to create in the next video. I'm going to go through an activity with you to create our first table and our first primary key. Then we have queries where you ask things of the tables and you will extract specific information from those tables. For example, you would not want a student address, you would just want to know which subject that student is doing. Then we have a form which you can give to your users. It is a user-friendly way of entering information into a table. Then finally we have reports, and a report is fairly self-explanatory. It is generated from the tables and it can contain specific information. So you would query a table. From the query, generally you make a report, and my example that I used earlier on is your boss asks you, please tell me who has not paid their rent this month, and you would run a query on the tables and you would generate from that query a report in which you would submit to your boss so that he could have a look at the information. So we are dealing with a relational database here, the relationship because of the two tables and the objects within the database. This is comprehensively what we will be covering during the practical part of Access. So we will first create a database, we will then create a table, we will then move on to create a query to extract information from a table, we will then create a form, which is a user-friendly way of putting information into a table, and you can restrict the fields that you can see. So you can give this to your users so that they don't have to see all the information that's in the table. And then finally we'll deal with reports. So please be aware we have types of database: flat file, hierarchical, network, tree structure. The one we are working with, which is a relational database, and our tables, queries, forms, reports. And then names of various database. You will have Microsoft SQL, IBM SQL, Microsoft Access, which is the one that we are using. There are numerous database packages out there. You can take a quick Google on that. Finally recapping on our tables, which is what we are starting with. They are created from fields, which is simply a row of columns, a row which is a record, and it will have a primary key, and an example of a primary key could be a student number or an ID number, and that would be unique. Moving on to our next video, I'm going to show you what we are going to be looking at. Here is the table that we are going to create by following these 9 steps, and I will go through this with you in the next video. Just taking a brief look at the table. The database has already been created, blank desktop database. This is the name of the table that is inside the database. Each of these are fields. They are columns. So we will have field 1, field 2, field 3, field 4, 5, 6, and 7. The table you're looking at has 7 fields, and each row, if you can have a look at in this example, it is an example of sales representatives and employees, vice presidents, sales managers, and so on. Each row is regarded as a record, and it should be complete. If we have a look at the number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, we have 9 records here, and this SKNMI that they've called it, you can use your own names to name your database. That is our primary key. So number 1 will not repeat, number 2 will not repeat, number 3 will not repeat. In any case, this activity of creating an access table will be in the next database. Please remember the theory behind the database, specifically that your fields are your columns, your rows are your records, and that we have a primary key. That is the end of this video. We will move on with activity 1 in the next video.